In a few weeks, I plan to start releasing several feature-length films that I've been working on for many moons, which I think you'll really enjoy. The video you're about to watch is an excerpt from one of these films, which treats with folktales endemic to Prince Edward Island, Canada's smallest province. Prince Edward Island, or PEI, is located in eastern Canada, next to the maritime provinces of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Its folklore derives from three main traditions: the oral stories of the native Mi'kmaq Indians, who have called the island home for generations; the traditions of the Acadians, French farmers and fishermen who settled the island in the 18th century; and the folktales of Scottish and Irish settlers who trickled onto the island in the wake of the British conquest of Canada. In this piece, we will take a look at two Little People legends, which straddle the tricultural anthology that is the folklore of Prince Edward Island. Enjoy. Long before canvas sails first appeared off Canadian shores, Prince Edward Island was the domain of the Mi'kmaq Indians, a semi-nomadic people who lived in seasonal villages, following the fish and game. The Mi'kmaq are said to have called the island Abegwit, a word which means cradled upon the waves. Much like islanders today, PEI's native inhabitants also referred to their insular abode simply as Minigu, or the island. According to island folklorist Frank Harold MacArthur, in his 1966 book, Legends of Prince Edward Island, ancient oral tradition has it that when Mi'kmaq braves first pulled their birch bark canoes onto PEI's ruddy shores in the mists of prehistory, having paddled out from their ancestral haunts on the mainland of what is now Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, they discovered that they were not the first intelligent beings to set foot thereon. Minigu, they learned, had long since been settled by a race of tiny men and women with preternatural abilities, whom posterity remembers as the Tweedlers. Oral history has failed to record the details of the Mi'kmaq's first encounter with the Tweedlers, recalling only that the relationship between the two races was violent from the start. For many months following their relocation, PEI's first Mi'kmaq settlers battled with the Little People for the right to hunt and fish on Abegwit. The Tweedlers violently resisted the Red Man's occupation at every opportunity, attacking any lone warriors who strayed too far from the main party, and stealing women and children from their wigwams in the night. When the Little People kidnapped the Mi'kmaq chief's only son, the Indians held a powwow. After deliberating long into the night, the tribe's elders and war chiefs decided that they must put every last Tweedler to the knife if they hoped to retain their foothold on Minigu. Weapons in hand, they left the safety of the campfire and set out into the dawn twilight, determined to achieve their grim purpose. The Mi'kmaq came upon the camp of their diminutive enemies at a place they called Pretty Stream. Another version of this tale in MacArthur's book identifies Pretty Stream as a brook which runs through Kellow's Hollow, a wooded area in what is now the town of Cornwall, located on the shores of the West River west of the capital city of Charlottetown. This author, with the help of Cornwall natives, has identified Kellow's Hollow as the Vale of Hyde Creek, a brook sandwiched between the parallel streets of Lacarty and Kellow Drive. Day and night the fighting went on for a period of 3 days, MacArthur wrote of the subsequent battle between the Mi'kmaq and the Tweedlers. No quarter was asked of either side, and none was given. Women and children were slaughtered along with the warriors of both races. And finally, when the conflict had come to an end, only a handful of red men remained alive to view the bloody scene. The bodies of the slain lay all about the place. Even Pretty Stream was full of dead bodies, while the water itself was dyed red. According to Mi'kmaq chief John Sark, from whom MacArthur heard the tale, the Battle of Pretty Stream was the bloodiest of its kind ever fought on Abegwit. Tradition does not place a date for the fight, MacArthur wrote, nor do we know how many were killed in the engagement. What we do know, however, is that the Indians completely routed the enemy. Those fortunate enough to escape at the time later were rounded up, put aboard tiny boats, and set adrift in the Gulf Stream. Tradition says they were all lost in a great storm that followed their expulsion. Ever since the Battle of Pretty Stream, Kellow's Hollow is said to have possessed an enchanted atmosphere, almost as if the blood of the little warriors who fell there imbued the wooded vale with the same mystical quality for which the Tweedlers were noted. Indeed, The ancient battlefield serves as the setting of many more mysterious tales in MacArthur's book and other collections of island folklore, such as the story of a haunted hollow tree which once stood at the edge of the old bridge over Hyde Creek, and tales of mysterious blood-curdling shrieks which emanate from the hollow at night, startling pedestrians who dare to pass over the bridge in the dark. If other island legends are to be believed, the echo of preternatural power at the site of their last stand may not be the only legacy the Tweedlers bequeathed PEI. Despite the assurances of native tradition, generations of settlers have told stories about little fairy-like people, spotted fleetingly from time to time in lonely groves and secluded coves throughout the island, hinting at the possibility that the Mi'kmaq of antiquity may not have exterminated their little neighbors as thoroughly as tradition contends. In the autumn of 1759, 1 year after Lord Rollo's infamous Ile Saint-Jean campaign, Major General James Wolfe, the second highest-ranking commander of British forces in North America, prepared to launch an assault on Quebec City, the capital of French Canada, by way of the St. Lawrence River. On his way from Louisbourg to this so-called Battle of the Plains of Abraham, the defining struggle for Quebec City, in which Wolfe would gain a decisive British victory but lose his life in the process, the general is said to have stopped at a point of land on Ile Saint-Jean's westernmost end. This beach would later be named Cape Wolfe in his honor. According to a story in MacArthur's book, at the time of the general's visit, Cape Wolfe was home to a man named John French and his mistress Janet Daisy, apparently among the first Anglo-Saxon settlers to take up residence on the island in the wake of the British conquest. The lonely couple had no close neighbors, save for the strange and elusive occupants of a tumble-down shack about a half-mile up the coast. This cabin, incidentally, was once the home of an Acadian family, whose members all perished from some mysterious and terrible disease. When the last member of the family died, the shack was left to rot where it stood, locals pronouncing it haunted and unlucky. For most of the year, the cabin stood desolate and abandoned, the wind whistling through the gaps between the cracked and graying logs that comprised its walls. On 2 particular evenings every year, however, the haunted house was invaded by mysterious revelers who played strange music and danced late into the night. John French and Janet Daisy never actually saw the shack's transient residents, but observed that on May's Eve, the last night of April, and on Halloween, the windows of the old cabin would glow merrily, and strange but cheerful music would issue from within. Those 2 dates being the supposed holidays of Fairies, according to Celtic and Anglo-Saxon tradition, John and Janet could only assume that the shack was the occasional abode of little people, perhaps the descendants of the legendary Tweedlers, whom the Mi'kmaq battled on the island long ago. John was discontented with his lot in life, and often expressed a desire to leave the world of men behind for the merry and carefree life of the fairies. One Halloween, after a particularly heated argument with Janet, he stormed out of his house and took a walk down the beach in the direction of the haunted shack. As he neared the gloomy structure, he saw its windows aglow with lantern light, and heard the sound of tiny feet pattering on the wooden floorboards to the rhythm of an enchanting tune, punctuated by silvery laughter and joyful chatter. Without a second thought, John made up his mind to join the party, and boldly strode through the cabin door. About a score of little people were dancing to the music of flutes and fiddles, MacArthur wrote, while others stood about talking and drinking nectar from tiny silver mugs, no larger than thimbles. The little people welcomed John into their midst, and invited him to join in the merriment. Meanwhile, back in her own cabin a half-mile down the beach, Janet was beginning to get worried. She recalled John's wistful talk about the fairies, and recognizing that it was presently one of the few nights of the year on which the fairies were said to be especially active, feared that her master might make good on his threat to join the little people and leave mankind behind. When John returned home that night, Janet was dismayed to find that he had shrunk to the size of a small child, a consequence of his night of revelry with the fairies, and a change which John heartily welcomed. Tradition tells us that after these startling events, MacArthur concluded, Janet returned to her own folk, and John went to live with the fairies. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, and would like to be informed when the documentary of which it is a part is released in its entirety, please subscribe and click the notification bell.